Do the Wild need to be on upset alert against the Ottawa Senators? We preview tonight's game on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Just a reminder, we are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we preview the Wild's game at the XL Energy Center tonight against the Ottawa Senators, a team coming off of a dreadful loss to the Chicago Blackhawks. And having said that, we look at whether or not the Wild need to be wary of a potential upset here this evening against a team that has really struggled so far this season. So we'll look at all of the various angles for tonight's game against Ottawa. My name is Seth Topol, host of Locked on Wild, veteran Minnesota sports content producer with over a decade's worth of experience covering Minnesota sports. Happy to have you along for a Tuesday edition of Locked on Wild. And as mentioned, the Wild at home tonight against the Ottawa Senators, a team that is reeling coming into tonight's game. So should be an opportunity for a get-right game for the Wild, but it might not be as easy as that. We'll talk about tonight's game and look at some of the matchups that'll be key for the Wild to try to come away with a win here tonight. But I wanted to start with just a little piggyback off of yesterday's show in which we looked at what we think of the Wild so far through the first month of the season. And so we threw it out on Twitter. You can find the poll at Locked on Wild on Twitter, at Locked on Wild, just asking what you put as a letter grade for the Wild through the first 8 games of the season. We had A, B, C, D/F as the options. And the poll, as of now, is currently sitting with most of the responses right at a B. 53% of the responses at a B, 43.8% at a C. A couple of people said A, no one said D or F. And I wanted to read a couple of the responses that we got because that is going to lead into the preview of tonight's game, because this has been kind of one of the issues that the Wild have had so far this season that we've talked about quite a bit. But this will help kind of reinforce that fact. Our friend State of Hoppy from the Soda Pod saying that he graded the Wild out at a C+ and said winning games, which is ultimately what matters, but they're squeaking out wins against lesser teams and haven't looked great while doing so. If they show more discipline and consistency, they will be a 2 or 3 seed. If they keep doing what they've done thus far, bubble team at best. Another response that I wanted to read, a B grade, and for the most part, they won the games they were supposed to win, though losses against Nashville and Seattle were disappointing. Could be better, but also could be a lot worse. And so looking at, before we even dive into, some of the things to watch for in tonight's game, this is just a potential for the Wild to really erase a lot of the issues and the fears through this point in the season. Is Ottawa is coming off of they're playing in the second game of a back-to-back. They just got throttled by the Chicago Blackhawks, giving Chicago, in fact, their first win of the season, losing 5-1. And so for the Wild, this is a really good opportunity for them to just take care of business and just win this game outright and come away with a nice win at home in which there's really never any doubt. Because this is a team that they should beat handily on paper. The Senators not great in a lot of really key areas. And so looking at this game just before we even dive in, this is a game, especially at home, that the Wild need to take care of business. And so far this season, these are the games in which they have struggled. The Nashville game at home is one in particular where you're playing a team that you should be better than, and the effort just isn't there. Some early goals for the opponent lead to the team kind of checking out during that third period. So those kinds of things are what has led to the Wild being where they're at 5-3 so far. And so one of two things is going to happen in tonight's game is the Wild are going to have, as I alluded to, kind of a get right game where we maybe see a goal from Fiala, a goal from Kaprizov to kind of get them going. And we see the team control the pace. We'll look at some of the numbers for Ottawa so far this season coming up later on in the show. They're not good. And so if the Wild are able to play into some of those outlier stats, this should be a game that the Wild are able to win fairly easily here tonight because this is a team that the Wild are better than. Will that happen is the big question. Will we see the Wild be able to hold a lead? Will we see them struggle in the start and maybe allow Ottawa to hang around longer than they should? So either the Wild are going to play really, really well and are going to win. They're going to if that doesn't end up happening, they're going to allow Ottawa to stay in this game longer than they should, and they will either win close or Ottawa may end up coming away with the win. And so those are really the only outcomes that are possible, I think, and it all depends kind of on where this team is at after the last few games they've played, in which the effort was better against Colorado, but still a loss. And then you had that game against the Seattle Kraken as well, in which things started out great and ended very poorly. So what sort of bounce back will we see from this Wild team? If we see a nice bounce back, if we see a great start, and if we see them take care of business the way that they should, well, then we'll get a win, and then we'll be able to have a little bit of a more fun time tomorrow, kind of breaking it down. So it's all about how the Wild bounce back and take care of a team that they should beat here in this game tonight. So we'll dive a little further in. As I mentioned, there are some stats that will kind of explain why Ottawa has had as much of a struggle as they have so far this year. So we will hop into those here next, and then we'll finish off the show by looking at some things that need to go well for the Wild in order to come away with that win here tonight. That is all coming up here on Locked on Wild. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all of that entertainment you love without any of the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called Directv Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there is no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directv.com. That's directv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, we are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Diving into a few numbers for the Ottawa Senators here so far this season that should be concerning for the Senators going up against the Minnesota Wild. I want to key in on some of the things that led to them getting boat raced by the Chicago Blackhawks. The Blackhawks winning 5-1 yesterday to pick up their first win of the season and to drop the Senators to 1-2 on the year. The big one that stands out to me is the fact that the Blackhawks went 29-17 in the face-off circle. 63% face-off wins for the Blackhawks in that game. And so that brings me over to the face-off percentages for players for the Senators. And honestly, not bad, but not good either. So you look at the players that have taken the most face-offs here so far this year. You've got Joshua Norris, who is just under 50% at 65 face-off wins, 66 face-off losses. Chris Tierney is 37 face-off wins, 47 face-off losses. You've also got Shane Pinto, who has 17 face-off wins, 33 face-off losses. And Logan Shaw leading the way for the team, 26 face-off wins, 15 face-off losses. As a team, 198 face-off wins, 208 face-off losses. And yes, I know face-offs are not hugely indicative of how a team is doing, but in the case of that game against Chicago, if you are getting beaten in the face-off circle that much, that leads to be a problem, and that can make life very difficult if you are trying to win, despite not possessing the puck really consistently at all off of face-off wins. So that could be a factor in what happens for the Senators here in this one tonight. The Senators also on the power play. They are 6 of 22 so far this season. So 6 power play goals in 22 power play opportunities, which is a 27% power play percentage, which is not, it's not too bad. I mean, it is better than where the Wild are currently at. And so that will be interesting to see because, I mean, let's face it, the Senators will get power play opportunities in this game unless the Wild are able to shore things up a little bit as we go here. But the Senators actually now at 23%, so they are currently just behind the Los Angeles Kings, who are 12th in the NHL. So power play percentage not bad. The Wild are 19th at this point in the year. So there's a little bit of a gap between the two teams, but really not that much. Now penalty kill percentage is interesting because the Wild are 25th right now at 73.5%. The Senators are 20. They are 2 spots behind, so they're 27th. Although the way ESPN has it here, these numbers are all goofed up. So just slightly worse than the Minnesota Wild on the penalty kill at 72%. So that leads me to believe that if the Wild get special teams opportunities in this game, they got to capitalize because, again, this is not a team that you want to let hang around despite the early season numbers. So if the Wild can take care of business and get to, a 2 or 3 goal lead, the earlier the better, because as with any of the other games that they've had this year, you let a team hang around and bad things can happen. The other number that I wanted to take a look at as well, the Corsi for percentage, which again we've referenced it here on the show periodically throughout the season. Corsi for percentage for the Senators is 47.6 in 5-on-5 situations. Average is 50%, so less than 50%, which leads you to discover that opponents are possessing the puck more often than the Senators are when both are at even strength at 5-on-5. So a good opportunity, as I said, for the Wild to have kind of a bounce back, a get right game, but there's also potential for them to just kind of do the things that they've been doing where they let the Senators hang around, and then this becomes a much tougher game than it should be. So interesting numbers for the Senators. Not to mention the goalie situation, which is kind of a mess, at least from what I can glean. The Senators have had 3 different players that have been in net so far this year: Anton Forsberg, Matt Murray, and Philip Gustafsson. Murray had 2 particularly good games and a rough one in which his stats have not registered yet against the Chicago Blackhawks. He was in net for that game and gave up the 5 goals on 31 shots. So that will bump his numbers up a little bit. But you look at what they've seen so far. Forsberg 1-2 with an .885 save percentage and a 4.8 goals against average. Gustafsson is 2-1, and Murray now is 0-3. So really have not had particularly good goaltending either this season, and so opportunity for the Wild to take advantage there, while at the same time acknowledging that the Wild have had a tendency to make backup goalies look really good. So we're playing kind of a theme here in that this game should go one way unless the Wilds allow it to go in a different direction. So that's kind of our theme for this episode, is that, looking at this game just on the surface, the Wild should be able to take care of business and handle their business and get the win. But they have yet to do that really consistently so far this year. So we're just trying to make sure that we keep ourselves ready for both possibilities as we get closer to the start of this game. We will finish today's show by looking at some players who could potentially step up and have nice games and some other things that the Wild need to do in order to come away with a win to improve to 6-3 on the season. Previewing the Ottawa Senators, we continue that next here on Locked On Wild. BetOnline.ag is back, and they are better than ever. They offer a new web interface for the start of the NBA season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline.ag remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. So head over to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive that welcome bonus. From basketball, football, baseball, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline.ag is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. Just as a reminder, we are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. So just looking at some final numbers for the Senators ahead of the matchup tonight against Ottawa. And obviously in the goals scoring per department, the Senators have a couple of players that the Wild need to key in on and focus on. Although I think, again, the Wild should have an all right time slowing these guys down. So Josh Norris leading the Senators in goals with 5, Drake Batherson with 4, Chris Tierney has 4 as well. That's really it. And so you've got 3 guys that have 13 of the team's 20 goals that have been scored so far this season. Um, Nick Paul and Alex Formenton have 4 of the rest. And so beyond that, you've got a few guys that have scored single goals, and that's it. Tim Stutzla, young player that was drafted by the Senators, 4 assists so far in the season, but no goals for him. So a few guys that are capable of scoring goals, but the Senators only 20 goals in 8 games so far this season. So they are really struggling offensively. Then again, the Wild have not been particularly great themselves. So for the Wilds, I think it just really simply comes down to not giving the Senators extra chances. We've seen plenty of penalties so far this year. If the Wild can just limit some of those opportunities, and I think tonight should be better in that regard, because I think this Wild team, is not going to be so. Um, it's just a lot of the penalties, as we've discussed this year, just seem to come from getting beat on the ice. The hooking penalties, the holding penalties, getting beat on your assignment, and just trying to kind of overcompensate to not make things worse, while then in turn making things worse. I don't think the Wild will have as big of an issue with that with the Senators. And so hopefully we can see those penalties kind of come down a little bit, eliminate some of those opportunities for opposing power plays, and as a result, keep the penalty kill fresh here for this game. So, limiting penalties is a huge key. The Senators do not go to the penalty box really all that much themselves. Just 79 penalty minutes for and I say just, but 79 penalty minutes for the Senators in 8 games, and 17 of that coming from Brady to Chuck. Other than that, there's really nobody else who has a high amount so far this season. So take advantage of opportunities. It's likely if the Wild do have a little bit of an advantage in the speed department that the Senators are going to put themselves in positions to be called for penalties. So capitalize on that. It is going to happen at some point, but it feels like, it feels broken recordish just continuing to say Kirill Kaprizov is going to score. Kirill Kaprizov is going to score. He's going to score eventually in one of these games. And, we just keep mentioning it until it inevitably happens. But I do really get the sense that this is an opportunity. It's a good opportunity for a get right game for both Kevin Fiala and Kirill Kaprizov. And so if we see goals from both of those guys, great. As long as we see better play from both of those, I think that's the bigger thing. I think that was one of the nice things about the Avalanche game, albeit some of the few that we were able to take, is that Kaprizov. It seemed like he was better out there on the ice, despite not scoring again. So hopefully he's getting back on track and could, get one at least, maybe a couple here against the Senators. We'll just have to wait and see. It looks as though the Senators are going to have Philip Gustafsson in net, and no word yet as to who the Wild will start, although signs pointing to Cam Talbot being the one that that comes in. And so for Gustafsson, he has looked really good in a couple of his starts this season for the Wild or for the Senators. He's 2-1, 2.23 goals allowed average, and a 932 save percentage. Has looked good against Dallas twice, and then got rocked pretty good against the Washington Capitals. So for the Wilds, just get to Forsberg early. Continue to pepper the net. and try to get the opposing goalie rattled before they get settled into a groove. And if we see Kaprizov and Fiala maybe get some better opportunities early on in this game, it's a perfect way to throw a goalie off their game and to get the early lead, to hold the early lead, and to come away with a win. So really, it all boils down to if the Wilds come out of the gate better and have a better game plan here tonight and play better, then it's likely that they're going to come away with a win. But if we see some of the things that have continued to happen so far in the start of this season, then it's going to be a lot tougher. And so those are really the things to watch for. Is the effort better early on? Do the Wilds get some good opportunities to score? In that case, then, maybe we get a 3 or a 4-1 win. If not, if Ottawa scores first, if Ottawa controls the pace of play first, well, then it'll be a rough one at the X. And so hopefully the Wilds get back into the win column, regardless of win or loss. We will break the game down on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Wild. So make sure to tune in as we see if the Wilds can get to 6-3 on the season. We'll have plenty of breakdown, and we'll look ahead to the rest of the week as well. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Thank you for making Locked On Wild once again your first listen every day. And now that you're finished with Locked On Wild, make sure to head to Locked On NHL for your second listen here today, helping recap all of the action throughout the NHL and some of the big storylines throughout the league also. So Locked On NHL should be listen number 2 for you as well. You can also check out Locked On Senators for some intel on the Ottawa Senators before tonight's game. Make sure to follow Locked On Wild wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube as well. We've got videos coming out to help preview games for the Wild, so we'll have one coming up here today as well. And you can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.